Alright, so here we are. We're going to be in our last videos for the troll. Really, all I wanted to do here for this video is a quick little finish up, right? Because at this point we really put everything on, cleaned everything up. You know, we did the spins on the hand from the hand video. We've done the cleanup up here, got the ear. We really have everything there, pretty good shape. The only thing we really need to do for this video is kind of put an eyeball in. I'm going to smooth it once, so we'll have our good low res, right? You can kind of already see I did that for the armor. I'll put a few extra edge loops in the knuckles, and I'll put like a little extrusion for the nostril. At that point, if you want, you guys can just refine a little more shape and stuff like that. So in this case, we do kind of need to get our eyeball in there. So of course, we're just going to go to create a polygon primitive sphere. In this case, we'll go to the options box. We probably don't need it to be super dense, but 20 probably is okay. We might want it on its z-axis, right? So I can just create it on the z-axis itself. But remember, I just went to create polygon primitive sphere options box, and there's our eyeball. And of course, it's a little big, so I'll hit R for scale and scale this down, right? And we'll hit W, and we'll just view move it up into place here. There we go. Now, making a full, more realistic eyeball is a little bit more complicated than this, but we don't really. It's not radically more complicated than that, and it's kind of one of those things where it's really just kind of two spheres, right? Kind of one that's kind of a little bit concave in the front here for the actual iris pupil, and then a second sphere that's a little bit bigger that's really keeps the basic original shape, and that's the one that you'd make a mostly transparent material with some reflection, kind of creating the eye wetness and kind of the lens. And the inner smaller sphere would be a little bit concave in the pupil iris area, and that's where you'd actually do the texturing, the pupil iris. We don't need to go that far because that's a little bit overkill for our model when we're just doing modeling here. So really, a simple sphere on its side will work great. Now, you'll notice, though, that I did create the sphere on the z-axis so that I'd actually have kind of the radial structure for this, right? So if I go to, hold on, right mouse button, face mode, right? Come on, make sure to do it for the eye. There we go. You'll notice that we have this kind of perfect kind of circular shape already there, kind of on the tips of the sphere. So usually we like to have our sphere kind of on its side like this so that we actually already get the perfect shape for the iris, pupil, stuff like that. The eye probably should be rotated down a little bit also, so I'll hit E for rotate, rotate it down. And believe it or not, your eyes don't actually stare exactly straight forward, so I usually kind of rotate it just a little bit to kind of look a little bit out that way, right? I know it seems counterintuitive, but believe it or not, if you actually just model and build your eye and kind of put it right in place so that it kind of doesn't stick out anywhere or, you know, look straight ahead, when you texture it, it'll look cross-eyed. So believe it or not, your eyes don't actually face exactly straight forward. They're off kind of kilter just a little bit. That's all you really need to do for the eye, right? In this case, I'll just go to Mesh. We go to Mirror Options box, right? Just to make sure it's on the X-axis. Combined with the original is fine, right? And there we go. And we've got our eyes. Now, in this case, I usually go in and make a last-minute little corrective shaping to this, right? This might even be one of those instances where we can go back to Channel Box Layer Editor and turn the visibility off temporarily for the other troll. And then just maybe turn X-ray shade off, right? Because remember, there's X-ray shade right there. And you can see that the eye itself, the eye lens a little bit could fit a little better. So in this case, I'm just going to go to Symmetry, Topology, pick an edge on the center right, because that kind of turns our symmetry on for that. So remember, you go to Symmetry, Topology, you pick an edge on the center, and it's just a more reliable symmetry for character creature modeling. And of course, we can grab some of these polygons, we can move them back a little bit. Some of these guys right here can come back a little bit. And this will just help this shape to kind of fit a little bit better, right? So you'll often just kind of come in and do a little bit of last-minute shaping just to kind of make sure the eyelid fits more tightly around the eyeball. You don't change the eyeball shape, right? It's the eyelid that conforms to the eyeball. So oftentimes, once you get your kind of eyeball in there, you're kind of at that point where you can do any last-minute corrective shaping, right? So that gives us that. Now, if I was to hit 1 on this guy, right, you'll notice that, where my clothing go? Is that actually on the other layer? I think I accidentally did put that on the other layer. I don't know why. Alright, yeah, so we'll kind of turn that off for now, though. It should be fine. All right. So, so when we go in here, we hit 1, we see that this kind of looks not that great low res, right? The body, the pecs don't look too bad, but the feet, the hands, the face are looking pretty blocky, right? You'll also see that at this point, this character is only about 3,000 triangles, right? Remember, that's just display, heads-up display poly count. You can check that on, and your kind of poly count's on. So remember, we were building this to hold up smoothed. In object mode, right? Hold down right mouse button object mode. I can hit smooth. And there is our final model. Just one smooth resolution. And you'll notice the body is only at about 11,000 triangles. In fact, if you include this guy right here, and I don't know why that material's off. If you're having a problem with your material, just hold down right mouse button, assign existing material, kind of Lambert 1, and there we go. For whatever reason, that just got turned invisible, but it was still there. So remember, sometimes you just hold down right mouse button and go down to assign existing material and just assign that default Lambert 1 that's usually on everything. So at this point, we can see we've got the kind of body there, and we're really just kind of ready for those last minute work, right? Which is just going to be kind of maybe to extrude the nostrils really quick. So I can just kind of go in here, maybe tab for drag select, and I could extrude, kind of bring these up a little bit, kind of up and in, just to give us a bit of a nostril, right? Doesn't have to be too crazy. And then, of course, I can go in here and I can do a little more shaping if I wanted to. Oftentimes, believe it or not, these edges right here will come out a little bit to kind of create the kind of nose bump, right? That little crease that's there. So often at this stage, that's when I'll kind of come in and maybe do last minute little tinkerings kind of for the nostril. You can go in here and if you want to refine some of the shape a little bit more in the pectoral armpit area, you can, right? You can kind of just bring these in a little bit, just kind of sharpen that crease a little more. You have a little more geometry if you want to. That'll make it easier to kind of bring some of these in to kind of create the elbow kind of little bumps, right? Those little kind of pinches there. So come back in here, maybe do a little bit right after this, right? Right after you kind of do that smooth. Just come in and do a little bit of extra shaping, just to kind of get the forms a little bit more dynamic, right? So you can easily come in here and do a little more shaping after this. We can even do something similar kind of on the kneecap right here, right? Kind of maybe bring some of these in a little bit. So don't be afraid to kind of come back in here and do a little bit more detailing of form before you're done. And then, of course, we're going to add some extra edge loops at the knuckles. I don't really worry about the toes for this guy. That's fine. But in particular for this one, we're just going to put in some extra edge loops for the knuckles, right? So we're just going to kind of put an edge loop in here and here. So see how I kind of put 2 in right around that knuckle. And then we can kind of put in 2 kind of right around this knuckle area, right? And that's because when we have kind of 3 edge loops really close to each other, not only does it make it a lot easier to kind of define, just by selecting these edge loops, some of these shapes a little bit better, right? There we go. Maybe if you rotate that a little bit. But you see how we kind of start to get that crease in there now, right? And a little bit of bump for the knuckle. But there's also enough edge loops here now that when it bends, it'll keep the shape better. Remember kind of the bendy straw analogy? So that's kind of really these last little stages we do on this character are just these little bits where we can just kind of maybe view rotate, kind of move them around a little bit, right? Remember E for rotate, and you just grab that kind of outside handle for the view. But I just put these extra edge loops in there. And then I'll kind of go over here and do the same thing over here, just kind of get in 2 extra edge loops kind of right around where that knuckle's going to be. And then we can kind of put in a couple right here. So usually I just like to kind of have 3 kind of roughly kind of in that area. And that should allow us to start to really get a little bit more kind of creasing, a little more irregular shape, right? So you see how this will really allow us to kind of just do a little bit of move, rotate, right? Double clicking on an edge loop, double left clicking. A little bit of view rotate, a little bit of view move. And you see how we can kind of start to get that little crease and bump for the knuckles. But like I said, we're putting it in here for that shaping purpose, but also we're putting it in there for having more geometry for this to animate better, right? With a couple of extra edge loops here, it'll keep its shape, volume a lot better. So you can see those extra edge loops are great, not only to provide us more for animation, right? Remember, elbows, knees, knuckles should always have a couple of extra edge loops, just so you have enough to keep the shape when it bends, right? but they also allow you for good shaping, right? So I'll kind of just go in here and do this a little bit for the thumb right here really quick. I usually don't worry about doing this on the toe just because, you know, it's more about showing you the fundamentals of this than having you do it on every part of the model, right? So just kind of a little bit of that extra little work is going to give you that nice little touch that's really going to allow this to work, right? Now what's really cool is at this point you can see I can easily go back to my channel box layer editor here, and if I want, I can just get rid of this layer, right? Right click on it, delete layer, and then we can get rid of the original model. And now we're just left with these guys, right? And you see they're all in low res, right? And the triangle count's only a little over 18,000 triangles, so it's not even close to 20,000 triangle model. You can easily have a lot more polygons for many video game characters nowadays. This could basically be an NPC level polygon model. So you see how that you can actually really kind of use smooth twice quite effectively and still end up with a pretty good low resolution mesh. Now remember, some of the last things we want to do before I'll show you the uvunwrapping for this would be let's actually cut this in half, right? Because it'll be easier to do these things later. I'm going to get rid of half of the character body because it's just going to be a lot easier to uvunwrap without half of it. And I'll turn isolate select on, right? Kind of the little blue button there, right? Or blue kind of dotted box with the cursor. And I'm just going to go to edge mode. And in this case, I'm going to bring my modeling toolkit. I'm going to turn symmetry off because we don't need down on. And I'm just going to double click on the center edge loop, right? In the edit mesh menu, there's a tool called detach, right? Some of you guys have actually already seen this. I kind of showed you a little trick. I feel like I even showed it once earlier in the term. But edit mesh detach will unweld that edge loop. That way, if we hold down right mouse button, go to face selection, and we double click a face on one side, you'll notice, particularly if your edge loops were perfect all the way down and you have all quads, it should work well, right? You can select half just by double clicking on a face because they've been unwelded, right? That detach edge loop unwelded those. So we can delete that. And this now puts us in the position where we just want to unfold this body. And that's all we're doing is we're just unwrapping the body, and we're going to quickly take that to Mudbox in the next video for texturing. So what I want to do is go to Workspace, UV Editing, right, to bring up the UVs. And we can see, just like always, our first step is to go to the Create menu here and make sure we're in Object Mode, right? Hold down right mouse button, Object Mode right here. And we're just going to create a planar, right? Doesn't matter what axis it's on, right? Doesn't really matter, right? Checkerboard, you're going to see there's a lot of distortion going on there, right? Checkerboard. So that gives us our starting point, right? Of 0 seams, right? Only the seams at the border are there. That's important, right? That's always that first step for me when I do unfolding, is I do a planar projection and get me to 0 seams. That way I can go hold down right mouse button in the 3D viewport, hold down right mouse button edge, and I can go in here and I can select edge loops. Now in this case I'm going to select an edge loop right here, which will kind of work well for our waist, right? And then all I'll do is I'll usually go in and kind of select 2 kind of down here for kind of the ankle, right? And then what we could do is I'll usually kind of go up here and I select one right around the shoulder. So we could shift, double click on that one, shift, double click on that one, and create a whole one. And then we'll kind of do the same thing with the wrist, right? Sometimes, remember, it stops at kind of those stars, so you might have to kind of add that extra little edge loop in there. And then I'll usually kind of pick one right around the neck, right? So shift, double click there. And these are going to work pretty well, right? You might kind of add little variations, maybe put this edge loop up a little higher, things like that, right? But for us, this will work pretty well and give us a pretty good unfold. Now, I still need some more seams, but it's easy enough to just go to your cut menu, right? So there's the create menu, and then there's that cut menu below it when you're in the Workspace UV Editing UV Toolkit. And remember, you can just hit cut, right? And what it does is it makes those selected edge loops seams. And now what we want to do is we want to kind of add more seams, right? So what I can do is I can kind of add a seam through the foot here, right? Look at where the actual seam for connecting the sole to the fabric or leather or whatever your shoe is, and that's a good guide. You're going to notice that this is actually following kind of where your pants end, where kind of your long sleeve shirt would end, right? You notice that sleeve I put, that shoulder, that edge I put, that seam I put around the shoulder was right around where your shoulder seam would be on clothing, right? So remember, clothing is actually a good guide for this. In fact, pretty much just about every biped you're ever going to make is going to use some variation of the seams we're doing right now. Even quadrupeds will be following something very similar. So of course I can select an edge here. And remember, if you shift double click on the same edge loop, it does a range selection, right? So if you just select an edge, and then you shift double left click on the same edge loop, it does range selection, right? You could use that, you can not use that, it's up to you. We'll cut that one, and now you see we kind of have the inseam for the pants. I usually kind of put a little bit of an inseam kind of back here too, just to kind of allow the kind of top of the foot to kind of open up back here. But you notice how we're kind of following basically pants, right? We don't need the seam on the outside, we only really need one seam on the inside, but we do want something generally like that. Just like we have kind of a seam at the shoulder, a seam at the wrist, and we can easily just select an edge here and do the same thing where I was just shift double click, and you see how it's on the same edge loop. So what it does is it allows us to kind of put a whole edge loop through here, cut, and now you can see that this is basically the seams that you would have on a sleeve of your shirt. Just like this is basically the seams, except for one on the shoulder up here, which we'll do in a minute, that you would have for your shirt. In fact, that's what we'll do. We'll left click there, shift left click on the same edge loop, and that does a range, cut. Now you notice we're making sure these seams always kind of touch another seam so that we can create a whole part. But you notice how those seams basically are mimicking your shirt, right? And then of course what we can do is we can come in here and we can do a quick seam for the hand. So we select here, and much like the foot, it kind of goes through, right? You see I'm just doing that shift double click on that same edge loop. And you'll notice that that spin and stuff that we did for the hand, you see how that's making this edge loop flow perfectly through there? There we go. So we can cut that. And now you see we have seam, and if you actually look at that seam, that's the kind of seam you'd have on gloves, right? The last seam we want to put in here would be to kind of do the seam for the head, right? And we'll probably kind of put it kind of on the back going through the ear. So I'll just kind of left click, shift left click, and you see I can kind of just wrap around here a little bit. Remember, you can always hit F for frame selection on whatever your current selection is. And you notice I'm kind of just doing that shift double click on the same edge loop, shift double click, because shift adds, and double left click selects edge loops. But when you use them together like this, it does a range selection where it does a partial edge loop. And then of course we cut that. You see how that's going to kind of separate the head into a front and a back. That's our seams, right? There's our seams. There's actually a screenshot in our Project 6 rubric area that shows that. Obviously you have the video now to kind of guide you exactly where to put the seams at. And of course now we open up the unfold menu here. But we do want to select everything first. I'm already in edge selection mode, so I might as well stay in that and just select every edge, right? And then we make sure to open the unfold menu, right? The little triangle to open it up. And I'm going to shift left click on unfold, just to make sure that the unfold 3D option's on. I always like to tell layout UVs to be on as well, right? But you also want to make sure that unfold 3D plugin's on. If you're not seeing that at all at the very top, remember that's Windows, Settings, Preferences, Plugin Manager. And you just scroll down in the Plugin Manager to the section called Unfold 3D and tell it to load and auto load. I'll hit Apply and Close. And there we go. And you'll now see that we have an actual pretty good low distortion. Now you might notice there's a bit of kind of slight stretching sometimes on this stuff. Believe it or not, that can happen because of freezing transforms. So if I go back to my classic channel box layer editor, remember, actually in this case I think it's fine. There wasn't much stretching. You see your transforms are fine there. But remember, we'll probably want to do a quick edit delete by type history just to get rid of all the history. A quick modify freeze transformations just to make sure that that's set. Let me go back to UV editing there. And we see we're in pretty good shape and actually did a pretty good job unfolding that. All right, so that should give you fairly low distortion. Like I said, if you want to, you can always try another real quick run at it. Just run unfold again. There we go. And that'll give you pretty good work. Sometimes I find that you might even want to try legacy first, right? If you're getting still a little bit of stretching there. Sometimes I find a quick shift left click and do kind of a quick legacy run on it will be far from perfect, right? In this case, it did a pretty good job, but you'll see there are certain areas like the hands that get pretty distorted. But it does kind of give you a different variation to run from. So then when I shift left click on Unfold again and I turn Unfold 3D on, oh man, we're still getting that to look a little weird. Sometimes it's a bit weird in the way it does it, particularly since these are actually working pretty well. If we even turned on Show Distortion, you're seeing very little distortion. So sometimes I feel like the checkerboard gets weird. It's always a pretty good guide, but sometimes that one will work fine. And these will work pretty well for some UVs for you. Keep in mind that when you have an extra one of these little checkerboards, that does mean that one of these probably needs to be moved in a little bit. Or might be this one right here, maybe rotated a little bit. Because basically a UV was sticking into the other quadrant. So it's always a good idea just to kind of check with your checkerboard to see if there's only one quadrant. All right. So that's some pretty good UVs that'll work pretty well for us. My classic, and what we can do, of course, is we can just go back to Mesh, Mirror, pick X-axis, merge. That'll mirror it over. You might want to double check that there is no weird super merging in here. Usually if your merge threshold is quite low, it won't be a problem. But that should be it. And at this point, like I said, really we can just kind of come in here and just do a quick Windows outliner, right? Turn isolate select off so we can get everything. Select everything, edit, delete by type history, right? Modify, freeze transformations. Remember that, make sure that the history for all your objects is gone, right? But also the freeze and transforms, make sure those all zeroed out. And in this case, I'm just going to get rid of that one because that's a light we don't need. There's the body, right? And so we're just going to go to Edit, Ungroup, right? And you see how some of these transforms are actually still frozen? And in fact, you can actually see that that's what I was talking about, right? So there's actually kind of, believe it or not, like this little zeroed out thing there. So I'm just going to actually go back in here really quick and do a quick rerun of that, just to be safe. Come on, edge loop, edit mesh, detach. And where are we running into a problem here? We shouldn't be running into a problem there, but you know, we select the face loop, right? Face, shift double click on a face next to it, delete. It was the eyes, or the mouth, wasn't it? What was it actually there? Let's see here. Yeah, so you can actually see it was kind of that merge, grab the eyes there, unfortunately. So, I'm actually going to undo some steps. I think this will actually just be easier to undo before we do the mirror. So you can see why sometimes it's really important to make sure to clean this stuff up before you do any of these things, right? So I'm going to go back some steps to before I mirror it back over. There we go. And I'm really going to make sure to ungroup this because that's what's really causing that problem. So we're going to go to Edit, Ungroup, and then you can see there's our body, right? And the transforms aren't frozen, right? So freeze transforms. Then if we go back to UV editing, and we go to edge mode here, select everything. We can run unfold on it again, and look at that, right? So believe it or not, your freeze transforms, even those were actually pretty good, right? It's not like they weren't a problem, but freeze transforms can actually affect the way the unfold tool will work on your character. Remember how that happened with automatic mapping on our desks if we hadn't frozen transforms yet? So in this case, I was looking at the group earlier, not the whole object, and that's why we had a little bit of distortion. So there we go. And then, like we said, I'll just kind of quickly just kind of move that guy in a little bit there. There we go. And go back to my classic. And of course, we can do our mirror. Mesh mirror. Boom. And let's just make sure, so if I hit like 4 for wireframe, you can kind of see that it's merging the eyes there a little bit. You can kind of see it right there. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that merge threshold down lower. Right? So it's one of those things where you can turn it down to like say 0.01. And then that'll only merge stuff that's right on top of it. Right? So sometimes the merge tool could be, mirror tool merge function could be a little overzealous. All right, now at this point, you know, we can just kind of turn isolate select off, make sure to do a quick edit, delete by type history. So this will be a little bit of extra practice for it. Sorry this video is going a little longer than I wanted to, but slight issue sometimes pops up. And then of course, that's the body. So we can double click on that. Call it body. Plus this is the last time I have to kind of get you guys to label stuff. Call that, I'm just going to call it armor. If you want to call it clothes, that's fine. And then double click on that one, call it eyes. There we go. And now we have officially this guy finished, UV unwrapped, and kind of the outliner, delete history, right? Edit, delete by type history, freeze transforms is done. All right, so that's a good place to stop.